Have you ever met someone just for a moment and somehow that moment changed everything? Not with a grand gesture, not with fireworks, but in the quiet kind of way that lingers, like a question you can't stop thinking about. This is a story about an ordinary man with oil-stained hands and a woman who was simply passing through, or so she thought. What happened next wasn't part of anyone's plan, but maybe it was exactly what they both needed. So grab a warm drink, settle into a quiet corner, and let this story unfold. And if you enjoy heartfelt tales about kindness, second chances, and unexpected connections, don't forget to subscribe. We've got so many more stories to tell. Now let's begin. A poor mechanic gave up his shift to help a stranger. She made him her business partner. It was a Thursday afternoon in early October when the Oregon sky turned a moody gray, casting long, melancholic shadows across the sleepy town of Pinebrook. A light drizzle had begun to fall, soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby whispered through the trees. Eli Dawson, his boots scuffed and hands stained with motor oil, tugged his denim jacket tighter around his shoulders as he hurried down the sloping road that led from Rick's auto garage. He was supposed to be back by 4 p.m. for the second half of his double shift, a job he couldn't afford to lose. But then he saw her. A black SUV sat idle on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in the fading mist. Steam curled out from under the hood. The woman behind the wheel had stepped out, pacing beside the vehicle in heels far too delicate for gravel. She looked completely out of place, elegant in a tailored coat, clutching a phone that had clearly lost signal in these woods. Eli paused. He could already hear Joe, his boss, barking in his head. Every minute late, I dock you an hour, but there was something about the scene, the way her shoulders sagged beneath the rain, the way she stared at the engine like it had personally betrayed her, that made it impossible to walk past. He approached her slowly. Need some help, ma'am? She looked up, startled. Raindrops clung to her lashes. Do you know anything about engines? Eli offered a crooked smile. A little. I work at Rick's garage. What seems to be the problem? The car just died. No warning. She stepped back, giving him room. I was trying to get to my mother's old house out near Lake Marlow. Eli nodded and popped the hood. Within seconds, he was elbow deep in a nest of cables and steam. Overheated, he murmured, thermostats stuck open. Might have been running hot for a while. She blinked clearly, not following. Can you fix it? I can get you back on the road. But it'll take an hour or so, maybe more. The woman hesitated, looking down the empty road, then back at him. I'd really appreciate that. Eli stripped off his jacket, slung it over the fender, and got to work. Rain dripped from his hair. His fingers moved with the confidence of someone who'd rebuilt more engines than he'd had birthdays. She watched from under a pine tree, arms crossed, eyes darting between him and the forest around them. What's your name? She asked after a while. Eli Dawson. I'm Samantha, she said, Samantha Hartley. He looked up briefly. Something about the name teased familiarity, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Nice to meet you, Samantha. They didn't talk much after that. She seemed to prefer the silence, and Eli didn't press. He had learned long ago that some people carried storms inside them, more turbulent than any rain from the sky. By the time he coaxed the engine back to life, the light was fading into a moody gold. Samantha exhaled in relief, but when she offered to pay him, Eli shook his head. I can't take your money, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. It was just the right thing to do. Her brows furrowed. You gave up your shift for this, didn't you? Eli shrugged. I'll make it up. She stared at him, and something softened in her expression, like a part of her that had been clenched for far too long had begun to ease. Thank you, Eli. Really? He nodded, already turning to leave. Drive safe now. But as he walked away, the warmth of her voice followed him. I hope the world gives you back what you gave me today. Eli didn't answer. He just kept walking, hands in pockets, shoulders hunched, unaware that this small act of kindness had just set into motion the most extraordinary chapter of his life. Back at the garage, Joe was fuming. Eli took the lecture without protest, knowing it was coming. What Joe didn't know, what no one knew, was that the 38-year-old mechanic with calloused hands and a weary back had done something more valuable that day than turning wrenches. He had paused for a stranger, and the world had noticed. That night, Eli returned to a quiet house nestled beneath aging maple trees. The porch light flickered inside. His mother sat dozing in her recliner, a half-finished crossword on her lap, her hands trembling lightly from Parkinson's. Eli kissed her forehead reheated soup and sat beside her, listening to the rain tap against the window panes. His life hadn't changed, not yet, but somewhere deep inside something had shifted, something he couldn't name, something that felt for the first time in years, like possibility. The sun had barely risen over the misty hills of Pine Brook when Samantha Hartley found herself standing in front of a modest diner on Main Street, her fingers curled around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. The little bell over the door jingled each time someone entered, and inside a soft hum of conversation and cutlery on porcelain made the space feel warmer than it looked. She hadn't meant to stay in this town. It was supposed to be a stop 2 days, maybe 3, to check on the old house her mother had left her. But after yesterday's breakdown and that quiet, selfless mechanic with oil-streaked hands and downcast eyes, something kept her from getting back on the highway. She had barely slept the night before. It wasn't the car trouble or the fatigue from travel. It was the way Eli had said it was just the right thing to do. She couldn't remember the last time someone had helped her without wanting something in return, especially not a man, especially not since Michael. She took a shaky breath and pushed the memory down like folding a letter you never intend to send. She looked out the foggy window. There was the garage, same faded signage, same crooked open placard, swinging lazily in the breeze. She wasn't sure why she came back, only that she needed to. Samantha rose, smoothed her coat, and crossed the quiet street. Eli was on his knees tightening lug nuts on an old Ford pickup, country music, humming from a radio propped on a nearby tool chest. He looked up as she stepped into the bay. His brows lifted, surprised but not displeased. "You again," he said with a slight smile. "Me again," she offered a nervous chuckle. "I was in the area. Thought I'd stop by. I wanted to say thank you again. You said it just fine yesterday." He stood wiping his hands on a rag. She hesitated. "I was also wondering if I could get the car looked at again, just in case." Eli cocked his head. "Still running hot, no. But I figured since I'm already here." He gestured to the office keys. She handed them over, suddenly feeling absurd. What was she doing? She was Samantha Hartley, former co-founder of a multi-million-dollar organic coffee brand, keynote speaker at 2 national business summits, a woman whose name had once graced magazine covers and Forbes lists. Now she was stalling in a small-town garage because a quiet stranger with kind eyes had made her feel more human in 15 minutes than her ex-husband had in the last 5 years of their marriage. Pathetic, she scolded herself, but she didn't move. Inside the small waiting area, Samantha sat beneath a dusty photograph of a younger Eli standing beside an old man, his father perhaps holding a wrench and grinning like a boy who had just been told he could fix the world if he tried hard enough. There were no plaques, no certifications in golden frames, just that photo in a jar labeled "Tips Not Necessary, but Always Appreciated," next to a stack of well-worn magazines in a faded calendar from 2018. 15 minutes later, Eli returned, wiping his hands again. "Car's good," he said. "No sign of overheating. I added coolant just to be safe." She reached into her purse. He held up a hand. "Don't, Eli. You can't keep doing things for free." He leaned against the doorframe. "I wasn't planning on making a habit of it. Just felt like the right thing again." She studied him, searching for the catch, the angle, the price beneath the politeness. But it wasn't there. Just a man who worked with his hands and gave more than he had to spare. "Have you always lived here?" she asked, born and raised. "Never left. That's rare. Not much out there I'm looking for." "What if it's looking for you?" she asked, half teasing, half curious. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Sometimes life doesn't knock. Sometimes it breaks down on the side of the road." She smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. Later that afternoon, Samantha drove to the edge of town to the weathered 2-story farmhouse that once belonged to her mother. The house sat quietly among overgrown pines, its paint-chipped windows cloudy, the porch sagging under the weight of years. Inside, everything smelled of dust and lavender, like time had paused the moment her mother left this earth. She wandered through the kitchen, her heels clicking softly on hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places. A teacup sat on the windowsill, still stained from the last brew her mother must have made. Samantha's throat tightened. She remembered Sunday mornings and cinnamon toast, the way her mother laughed like nothing in the world could shake her, and the way Samantha had promised to come visit more, but never did. Life had gotten in the way. Board meetings, red-eye flights, branding campaigns, and Michael. Oh, Michael, the man who'd sold their marriage to the highest bidder and burned a decade of her life for a slice of profit. Samantha closed her eyes, pressing her palms against the counter to keep from trembling. She had built empires, and now she stood in a house with no warmth, trying to remember who she used to be before the world hardened her. Maybe that's why Eli's kindness cut so deep, because it wasn't just about a car. It was about reminding her of a life where people stopped to help, where decency didn't come with a receipt, where a stranger could still make you feel like you mattered. As dusk rolled in, Samantha lit a fire in the old stone hearth and sat wrapped in a quilt that still smelled like rosemary and pine. She stared into the flames and whispered into the silence, "Don't let me waste this second chance." Outside, the wind rustled through the tall trees. Somewhere in town, a mechanic with tired hands and a quiet soul was probably eating soup beside his ailing mother, never knowing that his small gesture had begun to sew something torn wide open. Not just in Samantha, but maybe in both of them. The next morning in Pine Brook was unusually crisp, the kind of fall day where the air felt clean enough to drink, and the light carried a quiet promise of something new. Eli Dawson stood in the back of the garage, fiddling with the stubborn starter of a '97 Dodge Ram, though his thoughts weren't on the truck. They were on her. He wasn't a man prone to distractions, but since yesterday, Samantha Hartley had been moving through his thoughts like a gentle current, uninvited but oddly welcome. He couldn't stop replaying her last words. "What if it's looking for you?" Eli had spent most of his adult life avoiding questions like that. Life hadn't exactly offered him the luxury of introspection. Between caring for his mother and trying to keep the lights on his world had always been about what needed fixing, not what needed feeling. But something about Samantha, her poise, her eyes that held both strength and weariness, had unsettled him in a way that didn't feel bad, just unfamiliar. That same morning, Samantha returned to the diner. She ordered coffee, but this time she sat near the back, facing the window that looked out toward the garage. She told herself she was just trying to get a feel for the town, nothing more. But the truth whispered louder with each passing minute. She wanted to see him again. She stirred her coffee absently, the spoon clinking against the ceramic in rhythm with the quiet churn of her thoughts. She didn't understand this pull toward Eli. He was everything her world had never been: simple, grounded, untouched by ego or greed. And maybe that was exactly why she couldn't stop thinking about him. The bell over the door jingled, pulling her attention. It wasn't Eli. Instead, an older woman entered with a warm smile and kind eyes. She looked like she had stories folded into her wrinkles, and a laugh that could thaw the frost off any morning. "You're Samantha, right?" the woman asked kindly. Samantha blinked. "I am. And you are?" "June Barrett. I run the bookshop next to the bakery." She sat across from Samantha like they'd known each other for years. Word gets around fast in Pine Brook. Samantha smiled, unsure whether to feel flattered or cornered. "Don't worry," June added, reading her hesitation. "We're not nosy, just observant, and Eli Dawson." "Well, that boy's like family to half the town." Samantha felt her heartbeat catch. "I didn't realize he was so well known." "He's quiet," June said, "but good as gold. Been taking care of his mama for years. Never married, never left town. Folks like Eli are rare these days." Something shifted inside Samantha. Not pity, no, it wasn't that. It was admiration, the kind you felt when you saw someone living not for applause but from integrity. Later that afternoon, fate, or perhaps something gentler, nudged their paths to cross again. Samantha's SUV, the very same one Eli had patched up, began making a strange whirring noise. A lesser woman might have ignored it. She, however, saw her excuse and took it without hesitation. At Rick's garage, Eli met her with a raised brow and a barely suppressed smile. "Back already? Don't flatter yourself," she quipped. "My car's sounding like a blender full of rocks." He chuckled and gestured toward the garage bay. "Let's take a look." She followed, heels clicking against concrete. This time, as Eli worked, Samantha didn't stand off to the side. She moved closer, leaning just enough to observe. There was something mesmerizing about the way he worked, deliberate, calm, focused. Do you ever get tired of fixing things, she asked. He didn't look up. No one else seems to want the job. I'm serious. He paused, turned to her. Honestly, sometimes. But it's satisfying. You know what's broken. You know how to make it right? Not like people. Samantha felt the words hit her chest with a quiet thud. No, she said almost to herself. People are messier. They were silent for a beat too long. Then she cleared her throat. Can I ask you something? Sure. If you had the chance to start something new, something completely yours, would you take it? He looked up, frowning slightly. What kind of something I don't know yet, she said honestly. But I've been thinking, this town needs more than a garage. It needs a place for connection community. What if there was a space where people came for an oil change and stayed for a conversation over coffee? Eli stared at her. You want to combine a garage and a cafe? She laughed a full, uninhibited laugh. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? He wiped his hands on a rag. A little, but she continued. Imagine it. People coming in, stressed engines sputtering, and leaving with more than just a repaired vehicle. Leaving a little lighter, maybe even seen. Eli didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, You're serious, completely. Why me? She didn't hesitate. Because you're the first person in a long time who's made me believe in something again. Eli swallowed, eyes softening. You barely know me, and yet I trust you, she replied quietly. Another silence stretched between them this time, not from awkwardness, but reverence. He finally said, Let me sleep on it. She nodded. That's fair. That night, Eli stood alone in his small kitchen, a mug of tea steaming in his hand. His mother had already gone to bed, murmuring something sweet and half-coherent as he tucked the blanket around her frail shoulders. He stared out the window toward the moonlit road where her SUV had disappeared hours earlier. He didn't know much about Samantha Hartley, but she had a look in her eyes, a mixture of ambition and bruised hope, that he recognized, and something inside him, long dormant, stirred. The idea sounded absurd. A garage cafe? He barely knew how to brew a proper cup of coffee. But then again, maybe life wasn't about knowing everything before you began. Maybe sometimes it was about the willingness to begin at all. The farmhouse at the edge of Lake Marlowe stood like a memory, weathered, quiet, and reluctant to let go. Its white paint had faded into something closer to gray. The porch sagged in places, and the chimney leaned as if it were tired of holding everything up for so long. Samantha Hartley pulled up slowly, her SUV crunching across the gravel driveway. The motor stilled. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. She hadn't set foot here in over 15 years. She stepped out, the chill of late autumn brushing against her cheeks. The air smelled like pine earth and old promises. As she walked toward the porch, her heels clicked once, then twice. And then she stopped with a sigh. She bent down, slipped them off, and continued barefoot across the creaking wood. The key was still hidden behind the loose board under the second step, just like her mother used to insist. If the house ever wants you home, she'd said once, it'll open up for you. It did. Inside the house was dim but untouched, as though time had simply forgotten it. Dust danced in the shafts of light filtering through gauzy curtains. A porcelain teapot still sat on the stove. Its handle chipped, its lid slightly askew. Samantha walked slowly, fingers trailing along familiar corners. There was the hallway mirror where she used to check her school uniform. The oak-framed photo of her and her mother, both in oversized gardening hats, smiling beneath a summer sun. And the faint outline on the living room wall, her mother's favorite bookshelf, now gone, but its memory etched in dust. She didn't realize she was crying until the tears hit her collarbone. She sat on the old couch, still firm, still scratchy, and let herself fall back into the quiet. She remembered the mornings her mother humming Patsy Cline while brewing coffee, the way sunlight spilled across the linoleum, the scent of toast and cinnamon, and she remembered the last time she'd been here. The phone call from her mother, gentle but strained. You've built quite the empire, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. I miss hearing your voice on a Tuesday. Samantha had promised to visit that spring. Spring came and went. Her mother passed the following winter. Alone regret was a curious thing. It didn't scream. It sat beside you every day, silent and constant. It pressed into your chest when you were alone with your thoughts. It lingered in the smell of old coffee and lavender furniture polish. She rose and went upstairs, brushing past cobwebs and shadows into what used to be her bedroom. The wallpaper was still covered in faded vines and roses, now curling at the corners. The closet door groaned as she pulled it open. Inside boxes, old journals, a high school yearbook, letters from a father she never met. Samantha sat cross-legged on the floor and began to open them one by one. Near the bottom of the final box, she found something unexpected. A small envelope addressed in her mother's hand, sealed with the words, "For when you forget who you are." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. "My dearest Sam, if you're reading this, then I imagine life has done what it so often does. It's run you ragged, I know you. You chase perfection like it owes you something. But darling, perfection is lonely. It doesn't laugh. It doesn't stop to pick blackberries or dance in the kitchen. You weren't meant to be perfect. You were meant to be kind, to love people, to make mistakes and show up anyway. Please don't forget your roots. This house is built on more than wood. It's built on forgiveness, on second chances. And there's always one waiting for you here. Love you forever." Mom, Samantha folded the letter slowly, holding it against her heart. She closed her eyes and whispered into the stillness, "I'm sorry, Mom. I forgot." That evening she returned to town not for an errand or a walk, but because she didn't want to be alone with the echo of memories. She found herself wandering into June's Book and Bake, lured by the soft scent of cinnamon scones and classical piano. June was behind the counter arranging a display of secondhand poetry books. "Evening, sweetheart," she said without surprise. "You look like someone who could use something warm." Samantha offered a tired smile. "Is that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been there." She took the offered cup of chamomile tea and wandered through the shelves. Poetry, fiction, old travelogues. Her fingers landed on a thin-worn volume titled The Courage to Begin Again. She carried it to the counter. June glanced down and gave a soft hum of approval. That one's waited a long time for the right hands. Later, back at the farmhouse, Samantha lit a fire for the second night in a row. The room warmed slowly. She curled into the same quilt, opened the book, but found herself staring at the flickering flames instead. Her mother had built a life here, not grand, not glamorous, but full of meaning. Samantha had spent decades building her own empire, only to find herself standing in a dusty house barefoot and aching, craving something she couldn't name. No, she could name it now. She wanted a life that felt real. One with broken teapots, handwritten letters, and people who did things simply because it was right. Like Eli. And maybe that ridiculous idea about a cafe in a garage wasn't so ridiculous after all. Maybe it was the bridge between the woman she had become and the girl her mother had once believed in. Outside, a breeze swept through the pines, rustling leaves like applause. Inside, Samantha closed her eyes and whispered again, "Let me try again." But this time, slower, kinder. The idea took root like most wild things do, quietly beneath the surface, while no one was paying attention. Eli Dawson had always known the hum of engines better than the hum of people. But since that strange conversation with Samantha, he couldn't stop picturing it. The clang of a wrench, the hiss of steam, and somewhere nearby the scent of cinnamon and espresso swirling in the same air. It sounded ridiculous. It also sounded good. That morning he stood outside an abandoned warehouse 2 blocks down from Rick's garage, hands in his jacket pockets, brow furrowed. It used to be a lumber supply co-op. Now it was just peeling paint, cracked windows, and rusted signage. But it had bones, space, and a skylight that, if scrubbed clean, might let the sun pour in like redemption. Samantha pulled up beside him, her SUV purring softly. "You're early," she said, stepping out in jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt that looked surprisingly at home on her. He shrugged. "I don't sleep in much." She looked at the building and smiled faintly. "You think it's crazy?" "Yes," he said flatly. She laughed. "Me too." They stood there in silence, staring at the place like two kids looking through the window of a toy store. They couldn't quite afford, but couldn't stop wanting either. "Come on," she said. "Let's walk through." Inside, the air was heavy with dust and forgotten echoes. A broken counter slumped against the far wall. The rafters were cobwebbed but strong. In one corner sat an old office space with cracked glass and a view of the entire floor. Samantha turned slowly, as if trying to see not what was, but what could be. "You really think people would come?" Eli asked. She didn't hesitate. I think they're tired of being unseen. Tired of feeling like they're only as good as their productivity. He looked at her, brow raised. You know, she said, in the city coffee shops are all about branding, aesthetic noise. But here I want it to be about pause, presence. People who come to get their brakes checked and leave with a story, or someone to talk to. Eli chuckled. You're not aiming small, are you? Samantha turned to him, her eyes clear. When you've already lost everything you thought mattered, it frees you up to build something that actually does. He didn't know what to say to that. So he said the truth. I don't know anything about coffee. I do, she replied. And you know machines. You know people even if you won't admit it. She took a step closer, almost shy. Let's do it together. 50-50. Eli's stomach flipped, as in, business partners, equal partners. She said, you take care of the garage, I take care of the coffee, and we meet somewhere in the middle. He swallowed hard. I'm just a mechanic. You're not just anything, she said quietly. The next few days passed in a blur of sawdust, spilled paint, and swearing. Lots of swearing. You were supposed to hold the ladder, Samantha shouted from the ceiling beam, as Eli winced and held it 2 seconds too late. You didn't say now. You said soon. I said now. They bickered over shelf height, lamp styles, even coffee bean suppliers. But in the pauses between frustration, something else grew: laughter. Trust. The kind of quiet comfort that comes from showing up for the hard stuff and staying anyway. Samantha hadn't lifted anything heavier than a laptop in years, but here she was, hauling reclaimed wood and learning the difference between a torque wrench and a socket driver. Eli had never picked out throw pillows before, but he found himself standing in a thrift shop debating between earth tones and muted blues. It wasn't glamorous, it was exhausting, and it felt real. One night after painting until their arms ached, they sat on the warehouse steps drinking lukewarm instant coffee from paper cups. I know it's not gourmet, Eli said apologetically. Samantha sipped and smiled. Tastes like progress. They looked out over Main Street. The stars were beginning to appear one by one. My dad used to say, Eli began, that the best things in life are the ones that sneak up on you, that if you planned too hard, you'd miss them entirely. Do you believe that I'm starting to? He admitted. Samantha leaned her shoulder against his. Just for a second. I'm glad I broke down on that road. Eli didn't reply right away. Then he said, so am I. The following morning, they made it official. They stood in front of the town clerk, signing the business registration papers together. Heart and Wrench Garage and Cafe. Samantha slid the folder across the counter, smiling. I always liked names that said exactly what they mean. Eli chuckled. It's better than Coffee and Curses, which is what I would have called it after yesterday. June, who had tagged along as their unsolicited cheerleader and unofficial town gossip, clapped softly. Well, look at that. The garage boy and the runaway businesswoman. Who would have guessed? Samantha grinned. Life's got a sense of humor. June winked. It's got better plans than we do. That night, Samantha sat on the farmhouse porch watching fireflies dance over the tall grass. Her heart felt full. Not finished, not fixed, but full in a way it hadn't in years. She thought of her mother, the letter, the laughter, and Eli. She'd come to Pine Brook to escape, to be anonymous, to hide in a town that didn't know her name. But maybe this was where she was meant to be seen again, to begin again. The open sign flickered to life at 7:01 a.m. on a breezy Tuesday morning. Its light a little uneven, like it wasn't quite sure of its place in the world yet. Much like the two people standing behind the counter, Samantha smoothed her apron, brown linen tastefully embroidered with the logo Heart and Wrench, while Eli adjusted the rubber mat beneath the coffee machine for the third time in 10 minutes. They had spent the past week on a caffeine-fueled sprint to open on schedule, painting long after midnight, arguing over bean varieties, and finally collapsing onto mismatched armchairs scavenged from June's basement. The front space was a mix of contradiction and charm, half industrial repair shop with its pegboard wall of tools and engine diagrams, half rustic cafe with warm wood shelves hanging Edison bulbs, and a chalkboard menu that read, oil change plus oat milk. We fixed more than just engines. It was quirky, odd, maybe even off-putting to the uninitiated, but it was theirs. Their first customer walked in at 7:12 a.m., Tommy Caldwell, Pine Brook's local mailman known for his suspenders and stories no one ever asked for. Y'all serving real coffee or that foamed-up hipster nonsense? He asked, squinting suspiciously at Samantha's gleaming La Marsacco espresso machine. Eli grinned. Depends how strong you want it. I want it to slap me in the face and then apologize. Tommy replied. Samantha laughed genuinely, without the stiffness that had once haunted her shoulders. We can do that. She made the coffee. Eli checked his van. Tommy sat in the corner with his thermos and said, This place smells like possibility. And WD-40. The day rolled on with cautious curiosity. A woman came in with a clunky minivan and stayed for a chai latte while Eli changed her brake pads. Two high schoolers wandered in after soccer practice, pretending they knew what an affogato was. They stayed for hot chocolate and played cards under the hanging lights. Samantha caught Eli watching them with a look she couldn't quite read, half awe, half disbelief. You okay? She asked as she wiped down the bar. He nodded. I didn't think people would come. They didn't come for the coffee, she said. They came for the feeling. He looked around and what's that? She gave a soft smile. Home, even if it's just for a few minutes. Of course not, everything went smoothly. On day 3, the espresso machine exploded a burst of steam and shrieked like a banshee during the breakfast rush. Samantha shrieked back. Eli calmly unplugged it, popped the hood so to speak, and fixed it with a flathead screwdriver and a stern look. It's just a pressure valve, he said. To me it's a dragon, Samantha muttered, brushing stray grounds from her hair. They laughed until they were wheezing, leaning against the counter like two kids who couldn't believe they were getting away with this. But with each passing day, the rhythm grew easier. Eli learned to steam milk, though his lattes still came with unintentional foam art that looked like clouds or mushrooms depending on your angle. Samantha learned to identify the sound of a dying alternator just by listening to the way a car whined when it pulled into the lot. They teased each other constantly. You're getting good at this, he said one afternoon as she balanced 4 drinks in her arms. Thanks, she replied. Next week I'll be changing oil blindfolded deal, he grinned, but only if I get to name the drinks. Absolutely not, she said. You'll name them after car parts. He shrugged. I thought Cinnamon Spark Plug had potential. Their evenings often ended in quiet routine. After closing, they'd sit at the bar, Eli with a root beer, Samantha with herbal tea, and talk about everything and nothing, about her mother's stubborn tomato garden, about his dad teaching him to weld with a butter knife and chewing gum, about the versions of themselves they used to be, and the ones they were cautiously becoming. There were glances that lingered too long, pauses that said more than the words between them, but neither made a move. Not yet. They were still learning the fragile language of trust, something both had forgotten how to speak fluently. One night, as Samantha locked up, she noticed something taped to the inside of the window. It was a note scribbled in crooked handwriting. Thank you for fixing my car and letting me sit. Even though I didn't buy anything, I didn't know where else to go today. She held the paper against her chest for a moment before placing it in the tip jar next to a folded $5 bill and a peppermint. The next morning she told Eli about it. He didn't say anything. He just nodded and quietly changed the chalkboard sign outside to read, Come as you are, stay as long as you need. By the end of the second week they were tired, but it was the kind of tired that wrapped itself around your bones like warmth after a long storm. Eli stood by the window watching the last customer of the night drive away. Samantha came to stand beside him. You still think it's ridiculous? She asked softly. He glanced sideways. Absolutely. And then after a beat, but I think I've never been more glad to be wrong. She smiled, brushing a smear of flour off her apron. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and something sweeter, hope maybe, or roasted beans and second chances. Inside, Heart and Wrench glowed like a beacon for anyone willing to believe that broken things, cars, dreams, people could still be made whole again. Together. The success of Heart and Wrench spread through Pine Brook faster than the scent of Samantha's cinnamon scones on a cold morning. What started as polite curiosity had grown into real affection. People brought their cars for oil changes and lingered for lattes. Teenagers studied at corner tables while Eli tinkered under the lift in the next room, and the bell over the door jingled with such regularity it became part of the town's rhythm. But as Samantha had learned from a life in the spotlight, nothing good goes unnoticed for long, and not always by kind eyes. It started small. A sideways glance at the grocery store, a muffled conversation that fell silent when she passed by the bakery. People didn't say it to her face, but the words found their way to her just the same. She's not from here. Big city woman buying her way into our town. Bet she's using Eli, poor guy, doesn't even see it. Samantha had built corporations, faced boardrooms filled with skeptical men, and walked red carpets with a smile she'd practiced in mirrors. But nothing prepared her for the sting of small-town suspicion, whispered behind closed doors. June was the one who said it out loud. It was a slow Thursday afternoon. The cafe was quiet, a rare lull between the early retirees and the school rush. Samantha was restocking biscotti when June entered, her lips pursed tighter than usual. "You might want to sit down," she said gently, placing her worn leather purse on the counter. Samantha raised an eyebrow. "That bad?" June nodded. "There's talk. Let me guess, this place is too weird for Pinebrook." "Not quite," June said. "It's not about the cafe. It's about you." Samantha felt the familiar flicker of defensiveness rise. "Go on." June didn't sugarcoat it. "They think you're here for show, for some personal rebranding, that this whole thing," she gestured toward the space around them, "is a PR stunt after whatever happened in your last company." Samantha leaned back, arms crossed. "So I'm not allowed to fail in private?" "You're allowed to fail," June said gently. "But in a town like this, they need to feel you first, not just see you." Samantha stared down at her apron fingers, whirring the seam. "I didn't come here to prove anything." She said, "I came here because I was falling apart, and this place, Eli, gave me something real." "I know," June said, her voice softening, "but not everyone's seen that side of you. And it doesn't help that you're beautiful, confident, and drive a car that costs more than most folks make in a year." Samantha huffed a half laugh. "So what do I do? Bake forgiveness into my muffins?" "You show up," June said, "even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then." Later that night, after Eli had closed the garage and they were cleaning up the cafe, he found her unusually quiet. "You all right?" he asked, rinsing out the espresso pitchers. Samantha hesitated. "Then do people talk about me?" Eli paused, not meeting her eyes. "This town talks about everyone, so that's a yes." He sighed, drying his hands on a towel. "They don't understand you yet. Doesn't mean they don't like you, but they don't trust me. They will." She turned toward him, voice low and brittle. "What about you? Do you trust me?" Eli blinked, startled. "Where's this coming from?" "I need to know," she said, "because I've trusted people who smiled at me and stole everything. The moment I turned my back, I've been the woman who got paraded around a press conference right before the knife went in. I've had partnerships that were built on nothing but convenience. So if this," she gestured between them, "if this is just a small-town charity project to you, I need to hear it now." Eli stepped closer, jaw tight. "This is not a charity project," he said, "and I'm not someone who plays with people's lives. You walked into mine when I wasn't looking for anyone. And since then, nothing's made more sense than building this with you." Samantha's eyes shimmered, but she nodded. "Okay." But he added, "If there's something you haven't told me, something that might make it harder for people to trust you, maybe even for me, I'd rather hear it from you than from the next customer through that door." There was a long silence. Then she said, "I didn't just leave my company, I was ousted. My partner, my ex-husband, sold our shares without my knowledge, used a loophole in the contract. I walked away with nothing but a lawyer bill and some press calling me the failed face of organic coffee." Eli's jaw tightened, but not with judgment. "With anger on her behalf, I'm not ashamed of failing," she continued. "I'm ashamed of not seeing it coming." "You trusted someone you shouldn't have," he said. "That doesn't make you weak." She gave a soft laugh. "You say that now. Wait until someone accuses me of manipulating you." "They already have," he said. She stiffened. "But I don't care." Over the next week, Samantha did something she hadn't done in a long time. She showed up, not just at Heart and Wrench, but everywhere. She helped the school PTA organize a pie sale. She brought flowers to the churchyard cleanup. She bought 24 cookies from the high school bake sale and handed them out to customers with their coffee. She didn't explain herself. She didn't defend her presence. She just became part of Pinebrook. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen all at once. But one morning when old Mrs. Danvers stopped her outside the post office and said, "That chai latte you make, Tastes like my daughter's hugs. Samantha knew the tide had shifted. That night, as she stood by the front window of the cafe, Eli came up beside her. "They're starting to see you," he said. She looked out at the town glowing in early twilight. "No," she said softly. "They're starting to see us." It happened on a Monday. Not the kind of Monday with broken espresso machines or burnt pastries, the kind that arrives in silence, wrapped in the chill of something unsettled. The early light filtered through the cafe windows, like it always did, golden and gentle. The smell of baked apples and dark roast clung to the air. Samantha was wiping down the counter, humming absently to a song on the radio, when June burst through the door holding the Pinebrook Gazette like it was a warning siren. "Samantha," she said, breathless, "you need to see this." Samantha set down her rag, confused. "What is it?" June unfolded the paper and laid it flat on the counter. There in bold letters, just beneath the fold: "City Scandal, Exec, buys into Pinebrook. What's she really brewing at Heart and Wrench?" Samantha stared at it, her stomach tightening with each word. The article wasn't long, 3 short paragraphs rehashing her past: the failed company, the lawsuit, her departure from Hartley and Bloom. It mentioned her ex-husband by name, even quoted him. She needed a new image, he had told the reporter. Starting over in a small town is a smart PR move. She always was good at reinvention. Below the text was a photo taken outside the cafe. Samantha handing a latte to a smiling child. It should have looked heartwarming. Instead, it looked staged. Manipulative, like everything she'd worked to build in Pinebrook was suddenly repainted in suspicion. Eli didn't see the article until hours later. He'd been under a Jeep most of the morning, covered in grease, and unaware that the world outside was shifting beneath his feet. When he finally walked into the cafe for lunch and saw the folded paper on the counter, he paused, read, and stiffened. Samantha watched him from across the room, holding her breath, the way one holds a fragile plate at the edge of a table, hoping, praying it won't fall. But something in his expression cracked. "You knew this was coming?" he asked, voice low. "I didn't," she said, stepping closer. "I swear I didn't. I thought it had all blown over." He nodded slowly, but his jaw was tight. His eyes didn't meet hers. "They quoted your ex. I have no control over what he says, Eli." "But you do have control over what you tell me." Samantha's hands curled around the edge of the counter. "I did tell you. Maybe not every headline, but I told you the truth that mattered." Eli looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, Samantha saw hesitation in his gaze. Not anger, not blame, but doubt, and that somehow hurt more. The town responded exactly as Samantha feared. Some people stayed silent, offering polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Others canceled repair appointments without explanation. A few customers hesitated at the threshold of the cafe, read the article posted in the newspaper box outside, then turned away. The space that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt exposed. Cold, vulnerable, Samantha kept showing up. She baked, she poured, she smiled. But something inside her retreated quietly, instinctively, the way a wounded animal withdraws before anyone can see the limp. That evening, she sat alone at the farmhouse, staring at the fire Eli hadn't come by, not even to lock up. She didn't blame him, but she missed him in that aching, visceral way that reminded her this wasn't just about business. This was about trust, and trust once fractured didn't scream. It echoed. Eli, for his part, was driving aimlessly through back roads lined with evergreens. He didn't usually run from problems, but this felt different. Bigger, more personal. He didn't want to doubt her. He wanted to believe that everything they built was still real, still untouched by the spin of someone else's story. But the world had taught him to be careful, to stay small, to avoid anything that looked too good to last. And Samantha, she'd been everything but small. She was big city and complicated and powerful in ways he didn't understand. And yet, she'd cried over broken coffee grinders. She'd danced barefoot on the warehouse floor when they installed the first set of lights. She'd kissed his mother's hand and brought her tea with honey every Tuesday afternoon. None of that was fake. Right. The next morning, Eli showed up at the cafe before it opened. Samantha was already there, sweeping the floors in silence. She looked up when he walked in, the tension in her shoulders, visible even from across the room. "Hey," he said. "Hey," he stood there, unsure where to begin. Then he stepped behind the counter and picked up a rag, started wiping down the espresso machine. I read the article again, he said after a long moment, and then I read it as someone who knows you. Samantha didn't speak. I don't care what they say, he continued, but I do care if you shut me out. She looked at him, eyes full and quiet. I was scared you'd stop believing in me. I almost did, he admitted, but I didn't. She exhaled the kind of breath that comes from weeks of holding everything in. I'm not the woman they wrote about, she whispered. At least I'm not only her. I know, he said. I've seen the rest. They stood there for a moment, the silence between them no longer tense, just tender. Then Eli picked up the chalk from the windowsill and walked outside. He erased the old message from the cafe window and wrote something new. We're more than our pasts. We're what we choose to build next. The note was simple, folded in half and left on the bakery counter early one morning, just as Samantha arrived to grab her usual cinnamon roll and black coffee before opening the cafe. Eli, I need time to think. I'm going up to the lake house for a few days. I left the shop keys with June. Sam. It wasn't cold, it wasn't angry, but it was a turning away. Eli stood in the garage holding the note, the paper soft from her hands and smelling faintly of cinnamon and something else, lavender. Maybe her handwriting was fluid but unguarded, like the kind of writing you do when you've stopped trying to impress anyone. He read it again and again. Up at the lake house, the air was different, cooler, quieter, the kind of silence that didn't just fill space, it hollowed it out. Samantha hadn't been back since her mother's funeral. The house sat on a gentle slope overlooking Lake Marlowe, where the water was dark and still, and the trees held secrets older than memory. The porch creaked underfoot like it was exhaling at her return. She stepped inside, dropped her overnight bag by the door, and walked into the living room without turning on the lights. The firewood had long since dried and split. The kettle still sat by the stove untouched since that last winter. The stillness was both comfort and confrontation. Back in Pinebrook, Eli kept the cafe open. He brewed coffee, wiped tables, restocked napkins, and took customer orders with the same quiet precision he used under a hood. People asked where Samantha was. She's at the lake, he'd reply. No elaboration, just the truth in its simplest form. Some customers said nothing. Others nodded with a quiet understanding that came from having once needed to disappear too. But every evening after the last customer left, Eli stood in the doorway of the cafe staring at the empty chair in the corner, the one Samantha always curled up in with her tea and notebook. And every evening the silence deepened. At the lake, Samantha spent the first day doing nothing. She sat on the porch wrapped in her mother's old quilt, staring at the water and listening to the slow rhythm of wind through pine. She didn't check her phone, didn't answer emails, she just let herself be. By the second day, she began to move. She cleaned the windows, swept the porch, lit a fire for no reason except that she liked the smell of wood smoke. And in the late afternoon, she found herself pulling out her mother's old recipe tin, the one with notes scribbled in the margins and flour still dusting the lids. She baked not for a customer, not for profit, just to remember. By the third day, she opened her laptop and began writing not emails, not strategy, but truth. Page after page of it, not to defend herself, not to explain, but to finally understand. One night she sat by the fire with her journal open on her knees. I didn't come to Pinebrook to escape. I came because I forgot what it meant to be seen without being watched. I came because somewhere inside me, I still wanted to believe in small things. A car engine repaired by hand, a stranger who wouldn't take money, a second chance that didn't come with conditions. And I found those things, but I also found fear. Fear that I didn't deserve them, that I would ruin them, that the people here would see what others saw before and turn away. Maybe I needed to turn away first to prove I could still come back. She closed the book, held it against her chest, and whispered, "Don't let me stay gone." Eli sat on the tailgate of his truck outside the cafe. 3 nights later, his fingers wrapped around a thermos of lukewarm coffee. June joined him without asking. "She'll come back," she said, handing him a napkin with a blueberry muffin wrapped inside. He didn't answer. "You know," June continued, "I've lived in this town for 42 years, seen people come and go, run and return. Most of the time, the ones who leave without saying goodbye never meant to come back." He turned to her. "But she did say goodbye." June raised an eyebrow. "Did she? Or did she ask for space because she didn't know how to stay?" Eli looked down at the thermos in his hands. I don't want her to feel like she has to choose between who she was and who she's becoming. June nodded. Then let her know she doesn't. The next morning, Samantha woke to find a small envelope tucked under the front door of the lake house. There was no name on the front, no return address. Inside was a photograph. Just one. It was the chalkboard sign from the cafe window, taken at dusk. We're more than our pasts. We're what we choose to build next. On the back, written in Eli's handwriting, just 4 words, still building with you. She pressed the photo to her lips, then began to pack. Back in Pinebrook, the bells above the cafe door rang open at 7:03 a.m. Eli looked up expecting another regular, but it was her Samantha hair, wind-tousled eyes, tired but glowing boots tracking in soft lake mud. She stood there for a moment just watching him, as if waiting to see whether he'd smile. He did. She stepped behind the counter without a word, tied on her apron, and reached for the coffee beans I was going to open early today, Eli said quietly. Samantha looked at him. You just did. The first real chill of fall settled over Pinebrook like a quiet benediction. Leaves turned in earnest now, amber, crimson, gold, and tumbled across Main Street in soft swirls. There was something about the air brisk and full of memory that made everything feel more real. Samantha stood outside Heart and Wrench, a scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, watching the wind tease at the corner of the chalkboard sign. The message was still there, the one Eli had written weeks ago. We're more than our pasts, we're what we choose to build next. She'd read it 100 times by now, but this morning as the wind caught the hem of her coat and brushed hair across her cheek, the words reached her differently, like permission, like an invitation. That afternoon, after the lunch crowd thinned and Eli had disappeared into the garage, Samantha found herself climbing the attic ladder of the farmhouse for the first time in over a decade. The smell hit her, first cedarwood, old linens. The faint sweetness of dried lavender dust floated in shafts of light from the small gabled window. Cardboard boxes sat in neat rows like long-forgotten altars, to a life before ambition, before heartbreak, before reinvention. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until she found it. A worn green leather-bound journal tied with a blue ribbon tucked inside an old shoebox beneath a stack of yellowing paperbacks. Her mother's handwriting on the first page, loopy and elegant. For Sam. When you're ready. She sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, sunlight warming her legs through the window, and began to read. The journal wasn't filled with recipes or homemaking tips like she expected. It was full of letters, not sent, not addressed, just written. Letters to herself, to Samantha. To no one in particular. I wish I had told her more stories about failure, about how I nearly quit nursing school, about how I cried in the pantry for an hour the first week after her father left. I only ever wanted her to believe in herself, but I think I forgot to show her how to fall gently, how to get back up with grace. She's becoming someone I don't fully understand, but I see her fight her fire, her ache for meaning. I hope the world treats her softly. I hope she lets it. I kept the house for her. Even when the repairs piled up and my knees ached from the cold floors, because someday she'll need a place to land. And when she does, I want it to be here. Samantha's fingers trembled as she turned the last page. There was no signature, only one final line. Come home when you're tired of proving, I'll be here in the stillness. Samantha pressed the journal to her chest, shut her eyes, and let the ache rise, quiet, steady, and cleansing. The kind of ache that doesn't wound, but heals. That evening, she returned to the cafe, a bundle of dried maple leaves in her hand. Eli was behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine sleeves, rolled up forearms smudged with grease. He looked up, and his smile was gentle. Good day, he asked. She nodded, held up the leaves. I thought maybe we could add these to the window display. He raised an eyebrow. Decorating now, are we? Only seasonally, she teased. I draw the line at pumpkins with glitter. They worked quietly, stringing the leaves along twine and taping them to the inside of the glass. Outside, the street lights flickered on one by one, painting golden halos in the cooling dusk. When they finished, Eli poured her a cup of tea, and they sat in the same chairs they always did, facing the window. She told him about the attic, about the journal, about the line that undid her. She never asked me to succeed, Samantha said, staring into her cup. She just wanted me to know I had somewhere to come back to. I spent so long trying to impress a world that never really cared. And all the while, she was holding the door open. Eli listened quietly. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix it. He just reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You're home now," he said softly, "and you don't have to prove anything here." Her fingers curled into his. A week later, Hart and Wrench hosted their first autumn gathering. It wasn't grand, just folding chairs, string lights, apple cider in mismatched mugs, and a local bluegrass trio playing under the soft hum of dusk. Samantha stood near the back of the cafe, watching the place buzz with warmth. The way Mr. Caldwell told stories too loud, the way two teenagers slow danced awkward and red-faced near the pastry case, the way Eli laughed with his whole chest when someone spilled cider and tried to mop it up with a napkin the size of a postage stamp. And in that moment, she understood something. She hadn't just helped build a business, she'd helped build belonging, a space where people brought their tiredness, their joy, their stories, and left lighter, a space where she belonged too. Later that night, long after the last chair was folded and the last candle blown out, she stood in front of the cafe window looking at their hand-lettered sign one more time. Then she picked up a marker and beneath the quote Eli had written added her own line. "Sometimes home isn't a place, it's a person who stayed." She turned to find him behind her coffee in one hand, jacket in the other. "I think we're finally ready," she said. "For what?" "For whatever comes next." He handed her the coffee. "Then let's meet it together." The first snowfall came early that year. A thin layer of white dusted the rooftops of Pinebrook before Thanksgiving, catching even the oldest farmers by surprise. By sunrise, the trees were frosted like pastries, and the streets shimmered with the hushed awe only fresh snow could bring. At Hart and Wrench, Samantha stood by the front window, arms crossed, watching the flakes dance beyond the glass. It was still quiet, too early for customers, too late for sleep. The scent of roasted hazelnut and baked pears lingered in the air, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Behind her, Eli was setting up the cafe stools with the same quiet efficiency he applied to engine belts and brake pads. He hadn't said much yet that morning. Not because anything was wrong, but because everything was starting to feel right. And sometimes that scared people more. The week before, Samantha had received a call from a woman named Rachel Swinton, a New York venture capitalist who had once chased her signature across boardroom tables and now wanted a second chance. "You've built something authentic," Rachel had said. "Investors are talking, a national chain based on Hart and Wrench's model could go far." Samantha had laughed softly, but Rachel missed the irony. "We're prepared to offer 7 figures," she continued, "franchise options, full branding authority. We'll even keep the name. Just say the word." But Samantha hadn't said a word. Not then, not yet. She needed time. That morning, with snow beginning to blanket the world outside, she finally told Eli. They sat in the back room, feet propped on empty crates, coffee mugs in hand. "She wants to buy it," Samantha said quietly. "Everything, the brand, the name, the story." Eli raised an eyebrow. "And what do we get money?" "A lot of it." She's talking national expansion, city locations, sponsorships, influence. Eli sipped his coffee unfazed. "And what do we lose?" Samantha stared at the steam rising between them. This, she whispered, "probably all of this." Eli was quiet for a long time. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Let me ask you something," he said. "Why did you come to Pinebrook, Sam?" She looked down to breathe, to start over. "No," he said gently. "That's why you left the city. Why did you come here?" She didn't answer right away. She didn't have to, he continued, voice low and even. "Because some part of you was still hoping people could be real. That small didn't mean small-minded. That kindness wasn't naive. That something built with your own 2 hands meant more than a dozen press releases ever could." She blinked, tears stinging the edges of her vision. "I don't care how much they're offering," he added. "What we have here." This, he gestured around the room, "isn't just a business. It's a place where people walk in tired and leave with something they didn't know they needed." He reached across the space and placed his hand over hers. "You gave that to them." And to me, Samantha closed her eyes, the weight of his words settling in the softest part of her. "I'm not selling," she said finally. Eli smiled. Didn't think you would. Later that afternoon, the snow continued falling in thick, soft spirals. Customers trickled in with flushed cheeks and snowy boots. Some came for tire chains and windshield scrapes. Others came for hot cocoa and cinnamon rolls. One by one, they filled the space not just with orders, but with laughter, familiarity, presence. Mrs. Danvers brought in mittens she'd knitted for Samantha. Because your hands are always too cold, dear. A teenage boy left a hand-drawn thank you card at the register. You let my dad sit here when he lost his job. Thanks for not asking questions. Tommy Caldwell brought his harmonica and played Silent Night in the corner, off-key but full of heart. And Samantha felt something rising inside her. Not pride, not success. Belonging. That evening after closing, Eli stood at the sink rinsing mugs when Samantha walked over and handed him a small box wrapped in craft paper. What's this? He asked. Open it. Inside was a leather tool roll, old worn, smooth with time, etched on the inside flap in faded script. To Eli, from Dad. The things that last aren't bought, they're built. He stared at it, stunned. Where did you... It was in your mom's attic, she said. June helped me find it. She said your dad gave it to you before he passed, but it got boxed away during the move. Eli touched the worn leather like it was sacred. I thought it was lost, he said, voice thick. It wasn't, she whispered. Just waiting. He looked at her, then really looked, and something passed between them deeper than gratitude, deeper than partnership. Samantha took a breath, stepped closer. I don't know how this ends, she said. I don't know if we'll grow or stay small, or if 5 years from now we'll still be making coffee and fixing brake lights. But I do know this. She hesitated. I don't want to do any of it without you. Eli didn't say anything. He just pulled her in and kissed her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was the kind of kiss that speaks without sound, that says, I see you, I trust you, I'm home. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, the lights of Hardin Wrench glowed like a beacon, not of success, but of something far rarer, something no money could ever buy. Spring returned to Pine Brook with quiet insistence. The snow melted in rivulets along the sidewalks. Dogwood trees blossomed in front yards. Children rode their bikes again, jackets flapping behind them like superhero capes. And down on Main Street, Hardin Wrench opened its doors just a few minutes earlier each morning, as if the longer daylight called for more time to share. Inside, the smells were familiar, now roasted espresso, baked peaches, and the occasional trace of motor oil. The soundscape had become its own kind of music. The clink of mugs, the hiss of steam, the occasional rattle of a socket wrench in the back. It had been nearly a year since that roadside encounter, and yet it still felt like the beginning of something. Ely Dawson stood behind the counter in his usual flannel, pouring coffee into a chipped mug someone had left behind months ago and now refused to drink from anything else. His hands, always steady, bore the calluses of labor, but the gestures of someone who had grown used to gentleness. He looked up as Samantha entered through the back door, sunlight haloing around her as she carried in a box of fresh flowers from June's garden. Ranunculus, she said, setting the box down. June says they symbolize charm and attraction. Eli smirked. That why you're planting them near the front, I figured we could use some extra charm this spring. He watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the way she always did when she was trying not to smile too wide. There was a time when she walked like she was expecting the world to collapse at her feet. Now she moved like she had nothing left to prove, only something to share. By mid-morning, the cafe was alive. Grace Alston, the local high school art teacher, sipped a lavender latte while grading sketches in the sunlit corner. A pair of teenage boys debated over the best place to install the new community bulletin board. A young couple read poetry aloud near the fireplace, interrupting themselves with laughter. There were places with sleeker espresso machines, more curated aesthetics, newer paint. But Hardin Wrench had something different, a warmth that lingered even after the drinks cooled, even after people left. It wasn't just the drinks or the service. It was the feeling of being known. After lunch, a man named Dale walked in middle age with paint on his jeans and a weariness around his eyes. He lingered at the threshold longer than most, unsure if he belonged. Eli noticed. He didn't say much, just offered a quiet nod, gestured to the stool at the counter. Samantha brought him a cup of coffee without asking what he wanted. You look like you've had a week, she said gently. Dale gave a weak laugh. Try a year. He sipped, then looked up, voice low. I lost my wife last fall. Still not sure how to be anything without her. Samantha's hand touched the counter between them. You don't have to figure it out all at once. You just have to keep showing up. He nodded, eyes misting. It's quiet at home, but it's less quiet here. He stayed an hour longer than he meant to. On his way out, he paused at the chalkboard window, now covered in little handwritten messages from customers. This place saved my son's spirit. Came in for a tune-up, left with peace. Thank you for remembering my name when I couldn't remember myself. Dale added his own, I remembered how to breathe here. That night, the cafe closed early. Eli and Samantha drove up to the hill just west of town, where the land rolled like an old quilt and the lights of Pine Brook glittered below. They brought a thermos of coffee, a blanket, and the quiet kind of conversation that only happens when nothing needs proving. They sat on the hood of Eli's truck as the sky turned lavender, then gold, then navy. Samantha leaned against him, hand in his. I keep thinking how different everything could have been if you hadn't stopped that day. Eli looked down at her. I almost didn't. I was late for a shift. She smiled. Do you ever miss it? The old life? He shook his head. No, because it brought me here. He paused, and here is enough. She closed her eyes. Let the moment settle. I think we're the luckiest people alive, she whispered. Eli chuckled softly. Funny, isn't it? Two broken people running from everything end up building something better than we ever planned, because we stopped running, and because, he added, we didn't try to fix each other. We just made space. Back in town, the windows of Heart and Wrench glowed softly into the night. Inside, beside the cash register, a small wooden plaque had been hung that morning. Samantha had carved it herself with the help of Eli's old tools. It read, built with kindness, brewed with hope, held together by heart, and beneath it, in faded carved script from years ago, a line rediscovered, not overwritten. The things that last aren't bought, they're built. Some stories end with grand gestures. This one ended with something better. Two people no longer afraid, a town no longer strangers, and a place where everyone, no matter how lost, tired, or uncertain, could walk in and feel, even for a moment, like they'd finally come home. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Did this story touch something in your heart? Have you ever experienced a moment of unexpected kindness that stayed with you? If you enjoy stories that remind us of the beauty in everyday lives, of love, grace, and second chances, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a new one. Thank you so much for watching and for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the good.